How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. In Jennifer Savran Kelly's beautiful debut novel, Endpapers, a curious bookbinding discovery turns into a mystery and an adventure to uncover the origins of a community of queer artists struggling to find hope and happiness in the 1950s. Dawn, an artist and bookbinder for the Met, uncovers a letter secreted away behind the cover of a lesbian pulp novel, itself a taboo of the time. The writer of the letter, Gertrude Kleber, who had escaped Nazi Germany, writes to a woman about growing feelings of desire and her confusion in understanding her place in a society that would brand those feelings as illness. For Dawn, this is a revelation and a calling card from the past that mirrors her own journey to discover an expression of her gender in a form that brings happiness and contentment. Living and involved with Lucas, who is himself unclear about his desires, presents Dawn with difficult questions about what choices are available to her. Dawn will soon discover that locating Gertrude, still alive and living in the city, is just the beginning of her search. She will discover a society of women artists, self-titled sapphic warriors, who create art that tries to carve a space for a future that can have room for every expression of gender and desire. Written with tender and compelling prose, Jennifer Savran Kelly's Endpapers is a generous and probing study of a historical thread that pulls together well more than just two people. Jennifer lives in Ithaca, New York, where she writes, binds books, and works as a production editor at Cornell University Press. Her debut novel, Endpapers, is a finalist for a 2024 Lambda Literary Award and was a Fall-Winter 2023 Indies Introduce pick. It won a grant from the Barbara Deming Memorial Foundation and was selected as a finalist for the SFWP Literary Awards Program and the James Jones First Novel Fellowship. Her short work has been published in Potomac Review, Hobart, Black Warrior Review, Trampist, and elsewhere. Welcome to the show, Jennifer Savran Kelly.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Chris. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so pleased that you're here. I want to start with a conversation about bookbinding, which is something that you do and is a pretty niche vocation. I think it lives somewhere between artistic passion and a job that requires a lot of medieval skills. I know I know that this is a part of your life, but I'm wondering what its appeal was as a subject matter for the novel.
Yeah, it's funny because I had spoken to an agent years before about another novel, and her response to that was, I understand you're a bookbinder. How come you don't write a novel about bookbinding? Which I thought was really frustrating at the time. And also I thought, I really don't want to write a novel about bookbinding because it's something that I do on its own. And when I write, I think of that as something very different. But the truth is they've always been pretty connected for me. And when I came up with the idea to write about gender and sexuality, I didn't quite have a story yet. I just knew that that was something I was interested in. And what I was even more interested in at the time than bookbinding was this idea that people early on, bookbinders, when most books were bound by hand or all books were bound by hand, people would sometimes hide personal letters under the end papers of books. And unless the book was destroyed in some way or had fallen apart, you would never know it was there. And there was something about that that just stayed with me. It was one of the first things I learned when I started learning about bookbinding. And so I think that the sort of romantic and tragic notion of, wanting to reveal yourself, but at the same time wanting to hide it in a way that might never be found. And also the reverse of that, being the sort of, sitting there holding and reading a book and never knowing that there might be a personal letter for you hidden somewhere under the end pages, under the end papers. Those ideas just sort of haunted me for a long time. And so when I decided that I wanted to write about gender and sexuality, which was sort of always something I had been dancing around in my writing, but hadn't really focused on in the way that I do in this book, there was something about this idea, not only of the romantic idea of having something hidden under the end papers, but to me, bookbinding is a sort of art form or craft that is very much, it's a very intimate and sort of bodily thing, I think, because the experience of reading a book, you either lie down with it on the couch or you get into bed with it under the covers. It's unlike some other art forms. You're really you're interacting with it in a very physical and intimate way. And people talk about getting lost in books. And it's the same, I think, with bookbinding for me, the very tactile, sensual pleasures of paper and board and glue and, the sewing. And so I think because I was writing about a character who was struggling with her body, I felt like bookbinding was this very natural way to show her experiencing pleasure in her body, or with her body, and being able to create something with her body that is also an intimate experience for other people. And so that's a very long way of saying that for all these reasons, I felt like it just, all of a sudden, I felt very inspired to do what I had felt very frustrated about when this agent had said to me, you should write a book about bookbinding.
And it seems, and I love the way you're connecting the reading of books as a kind of intimacy with the then sort of the secreting away of certain kinds of intimacy in a way that they might never be seen, but are there in this material way. And I like that Dawn relates the sort of secreted away letter between Gertrude and Marta to a kind of coded language that she uses in high school with the girls that she dated. And I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about how the tension between a secrecy, a sort of coding and a hiding of things, and then a desire to have an expression of that secret outside of the bindings of either a book or the bindings of society.
Yeah, that's really the tension that I feel like this book explores from the first page to the last, is this tension between wanting to reveal yourself and wanting to hide yourself. And how you had mentioned too, those sort of bindings of society, I think a lot of that desire to hide is because of the fear of how society will respond, whether with violence or just with bigotry or hatred. But also feeling this deep need to express who you are. I feel like the one thing that I've heard readers say that has meant the most to me is that regardless of gender expression or sexuality, the thing that I hope that readers relate to, and that some have said that they do, is this idea that we all have something about ourselves that if we squirrel away, if we hide it, if we deny it, it will sort of, it wants to come back, it wants to come out, right? And it will always sort of try to make itself known, I feel like. And in this book, that tension from the beginning of Gertrude using this coded language, and ultimately, I don't want to give away too much, but the hiding, I will say, not that she hid, but the hiding of the letter are all a way of sort of moving away while it's like this dance, right? It's a dance on this edge of, you're sort of moving yourself away while you're moving yourself forward and trying to figure out, well, what happens if I take this little step and then maybe retreat a little bit? And then what happens if I take this little step and retreat a little bit? And although there are some difficult scenes in the book, where people don't respond well to truth coming out. Mm-hmm. What I hope ultimately the book does is show that sometimes we can be surprised. Sometimes when we take that chance, when we come out of hiding, when we sort of peek out, we might find that the world is a more welcoming place than we thought also.
Mm-hmm. That's really nicely said. And I hope that's true. I really want that to be true about the world. Right. One of the most interesting things about the novel for me is Dawn's relationship with Lucas, her partner. It's a really conflicted one. It's, both are pretty uncertain about how they feel physically and emotionally in terms of the intimacy they have with one another. And they depend on each other, but they also have real boundaries that are difficult for them to cross. And I wondered how you started to sort of create this relationship and what you felt like it allowed us to learn about Dawn by being in this relationship with Lucas, who, when a friend asks Dawn if he's a guy, she responds, mostly.
Right. I think that on one hand, I did not want this book to be a book about a romance, right? And I felt like for me, it was important for Dawn to figure out who Dawn was, both in the context of, but also separate from the relationship that she was in. And in a very real way, at least from my own personal experience and that of people that I know, when you are denying a big part of yourself, and that part of yourself has to do with your sexuality or your gender identity, and you're trying to be in a relationship with someone, whether or not they're doing, they're experiencing similar issues, it can be a very big barrier to intimacy. And so the fact that they're both questioning, and Dawn is questioning in a way that's a little bit more active, I think, than Lucas. And that's not to diminish the fact that Lucas is also experimenting with gender throughout the book, but Dawn is a little bit more passionately wanting answers and clarity about who she is. And I feel that Lucas may be a little bit more content at the moment to live in this not defining, not knowing. But it's, again, creating this sort of barrier between them where in some ways it allows them to very much understand each other and get very close to each other. But in other ways that can matter for a romantic relationship, it really keeps them apart. And so I felt like that's part of the tension that I think is sort of inspiring Dawn as she's becoming more interested and seeing that the relationship can't sort of accommodate that. It can't grow enough for that at the moment, that she's sort of forced to look more deeply at herself and her part in it, and also to have to leave it in order to really find who she is. And so I felt like I wanted the relationships in the book to feel somewhat equal. I don't know if that's the right word, but again, so that it wasn't necessarily favoring a romantic relationship, because I also don't think that sexuality and gender, I think sometimes I buck a little bit against this idea because I first came out as bisexual in the 90s, and I didn't like the word because I felt like it sounds like somebody who just has sex with men and has sex with women. And I didn't like the emphasis on sex, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I've always wanted to be very clear that sexuality is about so much more than sex. And so I guess I didn't want that love relationship to take center stage. And it was important to me that there be a friendship and that there also be this relationship with Gertrude, who wrote the letter. And so I wanted those relationships to sort of have equal weight in Dawn's journey so that it wouldn't just feel like it was about sex or, a relationship, but really about a person's full identity as a person.
That comes across so clearly. I want to talk about the historical context of the novel, which, the present action is set in New York City just after the attacks of 9/11. The destruction of the physical city is matched by the destructive Islamophobia and jingoistic nationalism that Dawn feels coursing through the streets of the city where, quote, fear has become a collective emotion. And I wonder how you wanted this kind of really sort of ruinous background of New York to kind of both sort of reflect out and resonate with the past, where Gertrude's escape of Nazi Germany and the destruction of World War II, but also to give a kind of like a mood and a vibe, for lack of a better word, for this exploration that Dawn is on.
Yeah, one aspect of that was a little bit coincidental because originally I had a different backstory for Gertrude that had more to do with the Holocaust. And I wanted her to still be alive when the novel took place, right? The more contemporary story, Dawn's story.
Yeah.
And when I did the math, it brought me to somewhere near or a little bit after 9/11. And that felt to me like a very fruitful pairing. But then as the story changed over time, I still wanted to keep the post 9/11 time period because I started writing the book in earnest after Trump was elected president. I had started writing it before, but I'd really started working on it in earnest at that point. And one of the things, of course, that has been frustrating, I think, for most people, no matter what side you're on, is this disinformation, this age of disinformation that we live in. And I don't think it's new, but it's definitely more prominent, I guess, than it has been. And because of social media and the way that information can spread or disinformation can spread, I think it's just created a more exaggerated divide than we've seen. And so what that meant to me at the time was that if I tried to set a novel in the current moment, that I felt like there would be even less agreement now than there would be about a time even in our recent history. So again, I'm not naive enough to think that everyone agreed or agrees on what happened with 9/11 or what the outcome was or who was affected and who wasn't. But it felt to me like it was like looking back at that is something we can at least all agree on certain basic facts about that time. And so that felt more useful to me as a background than trying to set it in a more contemporary moment. And so I wanted that. So I don't know, again, how much to say because of spoilers, but, Gertrude's story is about a very repressive time in American history. And so I really wanted to show that these things don't just end, that, one particular, so the lavender scare comes up, right? And just because that ended doesn't mean that we're suddenly, a very enlightened society and that there's nothing to worry about anymore, right? That these things tend to repeat. They just look a little bit different.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
What does every USAA member have in common? Family. We're one big family who supports the military community and their eligible families. And if you, your parent, or spouse served, you could join our family and save big on auto insurance. Visit usaa.com/join today to check your eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Well, one of the things I that makes me think of is the fact that, the early 21st century is a time when queer as a word is just sort of a burgeoning reclaiming of power in that language for the queer community, and is still mostly an epithet thrown around. So it's, even though that feels like way closer than Gertrude's past, there's still this sense that we're in a different time, and things were perhaps even less resolved than we imagine now.
Right. And in the year that the novel is set, which is 2003, George W. Bush was trying to pass the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yeah.
Right. So the conversations about gay marriage in earnest were just beginning. And I think Massachusetts was the first state that legalized it around that time.
I think it was Iowa, unbelievably.
Was
I
it?
think was the first state to legalize gay marriage, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then Massachusetts.
Okay. Yeah, I'd forgotten about Iowa. But that was a year when there was also just a lot of discussion about whether gay marriage should be legalized. So that also, again, just felt like a really fruitful
No, you're
time.
right. You're right. It's Massachusetts. But I
Was
think
it? Okay.
Iowa was the surprising second. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. No, I really like what all that context is doing, and it also, it helps us understand that there's another layer of what it means to have the tension between, an internal secret and an outside expression, and that is danger. Real physical bodily danger, which I think we know from our very present moment has not only not gone away, but is in many ways increasing again. And it's something that, both Dawn and Gertrude think about, and it comes into play in their choices. And even when they do choose to be brave and true, it comes with a lot of physical danger. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. And, it was a fraught decision for me to write about that, because I know that for good reason, a lot of people from marginalized communities are tired of reading what, some people call trauma porn, right? That these stories about, trauma and violence against marginalized groups. And so, I had that in mind when I was writing the story. On the other hand, I did want to balance it with, feelings of hope. But on the other hand, I felt like this was the experience, for me. Trump was elected, and, laws were being either passed or proposed, and there was more violence happening against the trans community in particular. And I was really feeling stuck. I had kind of gone back in the closet for many, many years, and I didn't know how to be an ally. I didn't think anyone would want to hear from me. And I just needed to put something together that I felt like could, and I didn't even know if it would be published, but I felt like this was my way of trying to make people who are not necessarily part of the queer community. I also wanted people from the queer community to see themselves in the book, but I wanted to speak to a community that would understand that, this violence and these laws are not just affecting other people out there, right? So here I was in the closet, married to a cisgender heterosexual man, and most of the conservative people in my family who didn't ever know that I'm queer would have no idea that somebody that they loved was, potentially being impacted, right? And so my thought in writing this book was to sort of also get those people on board, right? To say, like, queer is not always what it looks like. And you may know people, you may love people who are scared right now. And so that was sort of where my inspiration to write about this danger was coming from. And I am writing more stories of queer joy right now, but it feels important to me. I think we need both. I think we need a balance. And
Well, there's joy in this book too.
I think so. Thank you for saying that.
For sure. Yeah. And it does not feel at all like, a ostentatious trauma. It feels so important to a connective thread, as I said, that draws these two historical moments together.
Mm-hmm.
Gertrude and Dawn each pursue a form of artistic expression that is collective, drawing others into what begins as a secret and that can perhaps find a communal expression. The power of those communities seems best expressed by a line in Gertrude's letter, "Lately I've dared to hope." How do communal art and hopefulness come together in Endpapers?
Yeah, I think there's a really strong power in art to show people the world or themselves in a way that other things can't. And I think when people come together and work together, what happens, and I say this from experience, is you may have an idea, or you may have a portion of a work, or you may write something, or you may draw something. And then as soon as you put it in somebody else's hands and invite them to collaborate, what happens is your vision gets even bigger than you, right? It starts to take on a life of its own. And it gets other people, when other people are working together with each other's art, I think it just keeps kind of expanding our minds, expanding possibilities beyond what you think or know that you can do on your own. And that experience has just always felt very powerful for me. And I wanted Dawn and Gertrude to have that. I think that's part of also that tension of wanting to reveal yourself and wanting to hide. It's one thing to be one voice, in the middle of, what might be a hostile world. And it's another to join your voice with other people who are, struggling with some of the same things you are, and to speak collectively. And I feel like that's very empowering. And so, for example, one of my favorite pieces of the book is this eye project that Dawn's friend Alice is doing with, these street artists who have this art project that's basically a response to the sort of heavy surveillance of the George W. Bush era. And they're creating these eyes that are a sort of form of counter surveillance, and they're showing up in art all around the city. And what I love is, before Dawn even knows about this project, she encounters her friend Alice's little eyes and feels like they're friendly, like they're not there to watch her, but to see her. And so I feel like that sort of power in numbers of, putting things all over a city, not just yourself, but as like a collective, is just, I don't know. I think I'm just repeating myself now.
No,
There.
not at all. And yeah, that aspect of the eyes and being seen rather than watched, I think is such a fascinating moment, and understanding the power of that kind of like public art and public expression. You have a really interesting metaphor for genderqueer, or perhaps sort of gender more broadly, and that is the merging of the male and female anglerfish. The natural merging, when the natural merging is nearly complete, there's just a bump of the male's testicles showing on the female body. Mm-hmm. How did this metaphor occur to you? And can you say more about its usefulness in representing and thinking about gender?
Yeah, it was funny because my son, let's see, it was like in 2017, he would have been something like 8 or 9. And he is very interested in science. And every day he would come home from school and tell me about things that he learned. And one day he came home and told me about this anglerfish. I had not heard of this merging with anglerfish, and I thought he was making it up. But it turned out he wasn't. I looked it up and I said, wow, that's actually a really interesting metaphor for me, because there's this evidence left on the body of the merge. Mm. And in the way it plays out in the book is that the person who tells Dawn about this, it's a chiropractor, the person who tells Dawn about the merge, Dawn's response ends up being, well, that's gross, because there's this bump left. That's disgusting. And she says to her, well, perhaps it wouldn't be as disgusting if the merge were complete. And So there's this, I kind of like that tension as well. And it's something I feel in myself about, I'm not trans, right? I don't consider myself trans. I don't want to transition to another gender. So I like this idea of having the mark of both genders, right? That it's not, you're not a complete, I'm not a complete female, I'm not a complete male, right? That there's always going to be the marks of both. And so I liked that she said to Dawn, perhaps it wouldn't be so gross if the merge were complete. But in that sense, I felt that it was more metaphorical, right? So to say, maybe you wouldn't think it was so gross if you accepted it, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that was sort of, yeah, that felt like a gift from my son coming home from school and telling me about these fish.
Mm. Yeah, it really, and it reminded me actually of the Goliath grouper a little bit. Do you know about their like transformation in gender? That they're really interesting fishes.
No.
When they get to a certain size, I think they all start male. And when they get to a certain size and weight, they transition and have distinct sexual organs and become female. And it's like, one of a handful of like transformative hermaphroditic animals.
Oh.
Yeah. So they're another perhaps interesting metaphor for understanding how one is many things at once.
Mm-hmm. I like.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Before I let you go, I'd love to know a little bit about what you're reading now, and if you have any recommendations that you might think the listeners would enjoy.
Yeah, so this is not new, but I just read Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro, and I was really taken with it. I felt like the simplicity, it was just sort of duplicitous, I guess. Like it's so deceptively simple, but the depths to which it explores humanity through the lens of this AI who is built to be a friend to a young girl it just really had me from page one. I loved it. I couldn't stop reading it. So that was one that I just recently finished.
I love that book too.
Oh my gosh. I just picked up another book by Ishiguro, so I'm very excited
Which
to
one?
read more. I picked up The Remains of the Day, which I understand is a little bit similar.
All of his books have that sort of, you said duplicitous, and there's a sense that something is very simple and straightforward, but there's like a profound undergirding of that simplicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, love it. So that was one I just read. Also one that you had recommended, which was Terrace Stories by
Hilary Leichter.
Yes, Hilary Leichter. Thank you. And loved that. That was, you had said that you could read that in one sitting, which is true. I think I gobbled it up in two, but a really lovely, surreal kind of book about that. Also, I think tells us a lot about the human condition, but in a way that sort of spins out into even more fantasy than Ishiguro.
Yeah, I love books that do things with physical space where it's not necessarily sort of fantasy or sci-fi. It might be just a kind of like anomaly of perception, but yet as a reader, it's so mysterious. Like, why is there more space than there should be in this particular, room, or in this case, like a terrace? But I really like books that do that.
Yeah, I love that. So those are two. And then there's one that I guess I'm interested in as a reader and a writer in particular that I recommend to everybody, and it's not recent, but All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Taves has always fascinated me. Because I didn't think that I would want to read it. I read the description. It's about the main character's sister wanting to commit suicide. But there was something in the description, I think, that said that it was funny. And I thought, how could that be funny? And it sort of intrigued me. And so I picked it up. It also had a beautiful cover. And the writer in me again and the reader in me were both equally entranced with how Taves really does keep you laughing through most of the book until the very moment when she wants you crying. And then you're crying. And then you're kind of laughing again while you're crying. And I just, from a craft perspective, I was just so interested in how she achieved that. And so for the readers out there who might be interested in something like that, that's a really interesting book. And I study it often. I often go back to it when I'm working on character development because I just find it so fascinating.
Yeah, she is so funny about like really difficult, like powerful, sometimes traumatic subjects. What an incredible writer. And that is an incredible book. And I too was like, this sounds like the biggest downer of all time.
Yeah.
And then I read the first page, and even just the voice of the first page, I was like so in.
Yep. Yeah. So, and I love a lot of her books, but that one just, I feel like that one was a nice bit of trickery as well.
Yeah. Well, the book I really want to recommend today is Endpapers by Jennifer Savran Kelly, which I just feel like is such a magnificent debut. It's doing so much that feels vibrant and needed now, but also harkens back to various moments in history where people, as is a universal, seek expression of their true selves. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was really wonderful. I enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Jennifer Savran Kelly for coming on to talk about her beautiful debut novel, Endpapers. You can find links to purchase Endpapers and all of Jennifer's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, ways to get in contact, and a link to purchase a podcast t-shirt. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.